Welcome to another episode of Cooking Healthy with Coastline. I'm Caitlin Ferreira, dietitian, and today I'll be taking you through a recipe using a seasonal vegetable. I'll be featuring spaghetti squash. So despite its category, it's a winter squash. Despite being considered a winter squash, they're actually harvested between September and October. So right around the fall is when you can really enjoy these while they're in season. However, they do keep really well into the winter, and you can find them year-round where we live. So we'll be using spaghetti squash in a Greek spaghetti squash toss, and it's intended to be really simple, so not a lot of cooking involved, but really tasty, very colorful, and we'll get started. To start, winter squash can be really difficult to cut. So be sure that you have a sharp knife, and to help make it a little bit easier, you can poke some holes in it and put it in the microwave for a few minutes. So we'll go ahead and start with that. And you want to put ample holes throughout it on all sides so that it doesn't explode in the microwave. So we'll get through each side here. And if you need some help with this part, if you're cooking alone, be certain to ask for some help because it is tough. And surprisingly, spaghetti squash is one of the, it's a little bit easier to work with. Some of those other squashes can be really difficult to cut. So hopefully using this recipe will allow you to find a way to enjoy winter squash and not be so concerned about the safety of cutting it. Okay. So we'll microwave it for about 4 minutes. We'll check on it, and then it should be ready to go back in the microwave. So we're going to be using the microwave to cook it. That'll help cut down some of the cooking time. While that's getting started, I'll go through some of the other ingredients we'll be using today. We've got a mix of spinach and kale, some cherry tomatoes, in addition to a couple fresh tomatoes from Grinnell Mansion that we're fortunate to have here today, some chickpeas, red onion, feta, fresh garlic, Italian seasoning, garlic powder, and some olive oil. So we've started to heat up the pan to get it ready to saute our veggies, and just got a few more seconds left on softening the spaghetti squash. You do want to be a little careful because it's probably just a little hot. So if you need to wait a minute, be patient. And what we're going to do here is just trim off the top and the bottom. And traditionally, you cut spaghetti squash lengthwise, but we're going to be doing it a little bit different, okay? So I'm going to start cutting off the top. Even after being softened a bit, it's still kind of tough, so. So oftentimes we think that sharp knives can be dangerous, but in the case where you're cutting something that really requires it, it's actually safer to have something that's really sharp so I can get the job done well. Okay. So I'll be cutting it into rings horizontally because the flesh of the spaghetti squash runs around its skin. So if we cut it lengthwise, we would get some shorter pieces. Cutting it horizontally, we'll get really nice long, stringy pieces of the spaghetti squash. We'll go ahead and do that. And then we'll have to scoop out the seeds before we put it back in the microwave. And do be careful if it's warm. You could keep the seeds and roast them just like you would with any other squash or pumpkin. So that's a nice benefit. All right, so that should be enough for our recipe. I'm going to scoop out the seeds, first using a knife to kind of cut around it, and then if I need to, I'll use a spoon. Here we go. Microwaving it really makes a big difference. Trying to cut this raw would be very difficult, pretty dangerous. Okay. So unlike other winter squashes, spaghetti squash is a little bit more mild. Most winter squash can be very sweet. So this one is nice because you can do a lot with it. It's very versatile, blends in with a lot of different flavors. And it's really popular. It's really popular as being a replacement for pasta. And that's what makes it a little bit different as well from other winter squashes, is this stringy flesh after it's cooked. It can be really fun for kids, especially if you're trying to introduce them to more vegetables, or maybe getting them used to cooking. This can be fun to work with once it's cooked. As you can see, some of the fibers there from the flesh. So I'm going to season them a little bit with some olive oil, garlic powder, and Italian seasoning. Put a little bit of water in the base of the container to go back in the microwave. Just enough to coat them. We'll use the garlic powder for seasoning the rings here, and some Italian seasoning. All right, I'm gonna make sure that it's all covered. This can be a little messy, but that can be the fun part in cooking. Okay. Okay. All right. So I'm going to put just a little bit of water in this microwavable container to help support it cooking. I'm going to put it in for about 8 minutes. Awesome. So now we'll get started on the rest of our veggies for the recipe. And before we begin, I'm going to cut up the fresh tomatoes that we have, cutting off the stem. And I'm just going to dice them a little bit. Now you could, if you wanted, use a sauce that you prefer. I thought it would be nice to use fresh tomatoes if you've had some growing in your garden this summer. And it can be nice to also switch it up from using store-bought sauces. They can be a little higher in sodium and sugar. And when you use your ingredients at home, you know exactly what's going into it. So adding some of the fresh tomato to our cherry tomatoes. Start with a little bit of oil in the pan. It's nice and warm. Mixing that around. And start with some red onion. A little hot. You don't want it too hot. Onion. let those cook for a minute, and then we'll add the garlic, and then tomatoes, chickpeas, and the salad greens at the end. So I'm using canned chickpeas today just to add some protein to the dish. It's easy, just as simple as opening the can, rinsing them off, and we're ready to go. You could also use other types of beans that you like, or lentils or quinoa. I know there's some, if you're lucky to find them, some canned cooked lentils, which cuts down the cooking time even more. It's as simple as opening the can like we did here with the chickpeas. And when you're looking at canned items, definitely look at the labels. So when I was purchasing the chickpeas today, I looked at one that said it was reduced sodium and one that was regular. And the only difference was about 20 milligrams of sodium. So it pays, even though it was a reduced sodium product, it wasn't that far off from the original. So it pays to look at the labels when you're looking at packaged or prepared foods. And same thing with the feta. Feta can tend to be a little bit higher in sodium, so be sure to look at those labels to try to pick the one with the least amount of sodium. And then you can control how much you put into the dish as well. Okay, so we're gonna add the garlic. Now the onions are starting to cook up, starting to get a nice translucent color. That there. The onions are starting to brown, which is gonna add a really nice sweet flavor. So we've got just about half the time left. We're going to check on that spaghetti squash. So it'll need a little bit more time. Just depends on the microwave that you're using and how big the squash you have. So just start at a certain time, like 8 minutes, and then if you feel like it needs more cook time, just add slowly, minute by minute. While this is still going, I'm going to start with, I'm going to do the chickpeas first. You can use as much or as little as you'd like. If you're preparing for a large group, you could go with the whole can, but just for a few servings, you could also do just a handful. Season it with some of the Italian seasoning that we had for the spaghetti squash. After about a minute or two, we'll throw in the tomatoes so that they can just cook a tiny bit and not get too soft. Now today we did cut the spaghetti squash horizontally, but if you were willing to turn on the oven, you could cut it lengthwise, and something you could do after it's been heated up to soften, cut in half lengthwise, and after you scoop out the seeds, you could actually fill it with any type of protein and vegetables, maybe top it off with some cheese, and throw it in the oven for a few minutes just to get everything cooked together, and maybe if you have cheese, melt it over the top. And then when you take it out of the oven, you can eat right out of it like it's a spaghetti squash bowl. So that can be really fun. But to cut down the cooking time today, we're going to focus on using the microwave. And I really wanted to show you the different texture you can get when you cut it in rings as opposed to lengthwise. All right, so let's check on that spaghetti squash. Those onion and garlic are very fragrant. And I'm going to throw in the tomatoes now. And just for a couple minutes, not too long. You don't want them to get overcooked. The tomatoes add a freshness and some bright red to the dish, which will be nice. And tomatoes are great for heart health. We're getting tons of fiber, vitamin A, vitamin C, even some calcium from the spaghetti squash. and fiber and protein from our chickpeas here, other antioxidants, vitamins, and minerals from the tomatoes, and a whole host of nutrients from our dark leafy greens here. Those will go in last. We'll just put them in before we're ready to prepare everything together. Now, the cook time of certain vegetables can alter the different nutrients we absorb. If something cooks a little more, certain nutrients will not be as readily available. But if you're eating some that are slightly cooked and some that are raw, you can get a nice mix of nutrients all together. Okay, I think we're ready for our greens now. You could use any mix of dark leafy greens you like. Although it looks like a lot, once they start to wilt, they really cook down. So you can be generous with the serving of greens. Now, if you weren't using all the spaghetti squash that you prepared, you could actually freeze it. It freezes perfectly fine. You could also get a small one, and they keep really well at room temperature for an extended period of time. So if you buy a couple small ones just to make the recipe, and you want to save the other, you can do that. I'm just going to add a little bit more oil to the pan here. So fat helps us absorb some of the nutrients in the dark leafy greens. We might even use a little bit more garlic powder. All right, and the feta will go on very last. We don't want it to melt. We want it to be mixed in with everything. And I can hear that spaghetti squash sizzling, and I think we're almost ready to go. These veggies look great. They're very colorful. They smell good. And they're just starting to get a little cooked, which is how you'd want them. You don't want them overcooked. Let's let them sit for a minute. 30 seconds. Okay. Okay, do be careful, it will be hot. Okay, you can see all the steam coming from it. Okay, so I'm just gonna move this over to assemble our recipe here. I've got our serving bowl. And as you can see, after it's cooked, it comes out with almost just effortlessly, comes out like spaghetti. We'll lay it at the base of our serving dish. I'm going to try to use enough to fill the bottom here. And if you wanted to give it a taste at this point, you certainly could, to give it a test if you like the flavor of your spaghetti squash. That's wonderful, look at that. Now, if we had cut it lengthwise, they would be really short pieces. They would be a little bit harder to kind of work with. When you're eating right out of the spaghetti squash, it's perfectly fine and very delicious. Okay, that looks good there. And our veggies are perfect. The timing worked out excellent. I'll take that off the heat and add some to our dish here. Really want to get some of those greens in there. Not only is it colorful, it's very nutritious. I'm using some chickpeas over here. Okay. So we've got our spaghetti squash there as the base, topped with our sauteed veggies. Top it off with a little bit of feta. And there you have your Greek spaghetti squash toss. You can enjoy it for lunch, dinner. You could even throw some chicken or turkey or steak if you have it prepared on the side, right on top. And you've got a very complete meal here. So I hope you enjoyed learning about spaghetti squash, learning a new way to prepare it without using the oven, incorporating some other nutrient-dense vegetables. And for more information and for more episodes, visit coastlinenb.org.